Coffee with God, of course, he brews. Come on in and have a cup of coffee conversation with God. That's right. Having a conversation with God, hearing from God, is as easy as drinking a cup of coffee and as natural as drinking a cup of coffee. So come on in and let's hear God in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 23 to 40, give us the history of the world, part 2, which is the second Old Testament summary, which will wrap us up and bring us right to Jesus. We're so glad you're here at the Biblical Channel. All we're trying to do here is try to help people understand their Bible better. And we understand and thoroughly believe that when people really do understand the Bible, they're not going to find anything better to, hitch your latch to or hitch your wagon to, or to build your philosophy of the world through. And you come away with hope, assurance, and that kind of feeling like you actually have some purpose. So that's why we do what we do. We are not trying to offend anybody. And if we do something that you like, please comment in the comment section on the YouTube, and also hit the like button. And hey, maybe even share it with a friend. So anyhow, we are in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 23 to 40. And we always read the text. It's a longer text, but it's a fun text, and it is a history of the world, part 2. We'll get to that in a moment. But it's really picking up from Moses to Jesus. And so let's start just by reading the text like we should. Let's hear it afresh. By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents because they saw the child was beautiful, and they were not afraid of the king's edict. By faith, Moses, when he grew up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to be mistreated with the people of God than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He considered the reproach of Christ greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. By faith, he left Egypt, not being afraid of the anger of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. By faith, he kept the Passover and sprinkled the blood so that the destroyer of the firstborn might not touch them. By faith, the people crossed the Red Sea as on dry land, but the Egyptians, when they attempted to do the same, were drowned. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell down after they had been encircled for 7 days. By faith, Rahab, the prostitute, did not perish with those who were disobedient because she had given a friendly welcome to the spies. And what more shall I say? For time would fail me to tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, enforced justice, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, were made strong out of weakness, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. Women received back their dead by resurrection. Some were tortured, refusing to accept release so that they might rise again to a better life. Others suffered mocking and flogging and even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned. They were sawn in two. They were killed with the sword. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute and afflicted, mistreated, of whom the world was not worthy, wandering about in deserts and mountains and in dens and in caves of the earth. And all of these, though commended through their faith, did not receive what was promised, since God had provided something better for us, that apart from us they should not be made perfect. Praise be to God for his words. Let's dive in and hear what God is saying in History of the World Part 2, Hebrews chapter 23 through 40. Well, it is always natural in our conversations with God that we pray, and I see no better prayer than the one the Lord Jesus gave us, and that is, Father in heaven, hallowed be your name, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our debts and our trespasses as we forgive those who have debts against us and trespasses. Lead us not into temptation, deliver us from evil. We're here to see Jesus and him only. Yes, Lord. Amen. All right, so we have, as we mentioned, History of the World Part 2, because last week we had History of the World Part 1. So History of the World Part 1 was really the book of Genesis, and the book of Genesis covers a truly unknown period of time. It is as big as the beginning of creation itself, the whole way up to Abraham. So Abraham's living somewhere between 1600 BC and 2000 BC, and then who knows when Adam lives? I don't think that's an answerable question. I know that some people think it's very answerable. I do not think that's an answerable question. Suffice it to say that it's a huge swatch of human history. The history of sapiens from God's point of view is really what Genesis is all about. And I love what a friend of mine said to me last week. He said, man, it seems like everything we need is right there in Genesis. And I would say, absolutely. But the story continues forward until we get to Jesus, which is the high point of the story. But all of the lessons and issues and circumstances and historical philosophies that come up in the book of Genesis are still alive and well in Jesus Christ and alive and well in today's day and age. So at this point, we are going to pick up on a biblical view of how to read the Bible from Moses the whole way to Jesus, really. So again, this swatch of history is a little bit more definable because Moses is going to be living somewhere between 1200 BC and 1400 BC. And of course, we know that Jesus, is 2,000 years ago. So this biblical history of the world part 2 is really covering, something like 1,500 years. And really, it does serve as a wonderful passage to help us to read the Bible better. Because if you didn't get this when you read the Old Testament from Moses to Jesus, then you missed something. You weren't reading it right. And that's always the main goal here, is to read the Bible as it wants to be read, not as you want it to be read, not as I want it to be read, not as anybody else wants it to be read, or some smarty pants wants it to be read, but how the Bible itself expects to be read. And, God is straightening us up on any misreadings of that Old Testament. This is what you should have taken away, which is a very simple, rendition. Didn't take the author of Hebrews long from verse 23 to verse 40 to summarize it all and tell us exactly what we need to know. That doesn't mean it's not worth your time in reading. It certainly is. There's lots of fantastic history that builds our philosophy of what God is doing in this world. However, we're here to move forward, and moving forward, we can't help but to notice, like the last passage, that the issue of faith comes up once again. This passage is all about faith, and biblically, the word faith has a lot more weight and has a lot more meaning than the way that we use the word faith. Today, the word faith is, I think, seen some pretty hard times because faith is used to kind of point out people who are thinking in terms of jumping off of bridges into leaps of the dark, into silliness, or faith is used as some sort of buzzword for religious or custom religion. It's just a word that is really misused in our current culture. But the way that it is used biblically has a weight that grinds itself or grounds itself right into our human existence and becomes the very fabric of our human existence, because the word faith brings with it the idea of trust and rely and depend and belief that. So those 5 words, faith, trust, rely, depend, and believe, are the one word that is in the text of the Bible. So in English, it does say faith, but in Greek, the original language of the New Testament, it is the word pistos, and the word pistos is a heavyweight word that brings forward trust and reliance and dependence. If you looked up the Greek definition of the word pistos, you would find a much heavier idea than just the word faith. Now, the word faith also does, and can be used to talk about trust and talk about reliance and dependence and belief. It's not like it's completely separated from those ideas, but we tend to separate it out and use those words differently. So that's what's important in the takeaway here. You'll never get what's being said here unless you understand how weighty that word is. In fact, the word carries so much weight that it really defines our human existence, because the word faith here is being used in a way that defines our assurance, defines our hope, and defines our conviction. That's what the first 3 verses in chapter 11 of Hebrews was all about, is that, faith is all about assurance and hope and conviction. And that word conviction is also a little bit troubling in today's marketplace of words, because we tend to use conviction in a negative way, whereas the word conviction is totally positive here. It's just about having that assurance, having that confidence, having that feeling of reliability. And as human beings, the successful human beings in life is not measured by money. It's not measured by vacations. It's measured by the amount of assurance, hope, and really your conviction or what you consider to be certain. So the word faith is no silly word, biblically speaking, and it's actually the word of relationship, so much so that in another place in the Bible, 1 Corinthians chapter 13, which is a passage that's very much like our Hebrews chapter 11, but faith, hope, and love are all linked together as almost a singular concept. In fact, love is nothing without faith and hope are nothing without love. There is a great tie-in to faith, hope, and love, just like there is a tie-in to faith, assurance, hope, and conviction. And if we really sit back and ponder our existence as human beings, we will quickly realize how important it is as human beings to have assurance, to have hope, to have conviction, so that we can really experience love. In fact, if you find someone that you love, you have found someone that you trust, found someone that you rely, found someone that you depend on and are willing to depend on, and find someone that you truly do believe in. And so this is a heavy concept, and it really is, from the author's point of view, it is really the backbone of the story of the Bible, because it's the action word of relationship. Human beings' existence on this planet is really defined by relationship. So, the emphasis on the modern world, on social, media, et cetera, is just a reflection of how social we are as critters on this planet. Being social is our existence. Yeah, sure, science matters a lot, but it doesn't matter as much as the relationships, the social status that we have. And I always like what Scott Adams says when he tries to annoy people. He says, facts don't matter. And to a large extent, he's right, because relationships matter more than facts oftentimes. So this whole idea is coming forward to us because the word faith is important to understand what God commends. And as we're told in the first 3 verses of chapter 11, what God commends is faith. It's just as simple as that. And also the word commend probably needs a little bit of unpacking, because we don't use the word commend very much, but it's also an extremely positive word. It's no negative word at all. But to commend something is to praise something, to lift it up, to congratulate something, to give a little hand clap on something. And so imagine this. God gives a hand clap, gives his thumbs up, gives his attaboy to faith. That's right. He doesn't give his thumbs up and his attaboy to your brilliance or to your good looks or to your bank account. He gives his thumbs up, his sign of approval, his sign of relationship, commending to those who have faith. And faith is very accessible to everybody, no matter what size your bank account is, no matter how many vacations you get to go on, no matter what part of the globe you live in. This is the fabric of our existence, and this is the fabric of the story of the Bible. especially the old part, and continues on into the new part as well. And so this history of the world, part 2, from Moses to Jesus, is a continuation from the author's point of view of the story of faith. That is the story of the Bible. The story of the Bible is God praising and commending faith. Even when people appear to be, weak, I suppose, or insignificant in the world's eyes, God lifts them up and praises them despite their condition, despite their status in this world. Faith gets God's round of applause. And I don't know about you, but most people I know live life feeling good about a good solid round of applause. A good sound of applause always makes us feel good if the applause is directed at us. And that's what commending is all about. And that, again, is just a relational word. It defines the very positive relationship that God is looking for. And that is, and really, it's all he's looking for out of human beings is faith. He's looking for us to put our faith, our trust, our reliance, our dependence, and our belief in him. And in that, God says you will get the greatest amount of assurance, hope, conviction, or, certainty to get you through this world. And that's the backbone of the story here in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 23 to 40. And so let's just dive into what comes up here. The first line, by faith Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents because they saw that the child was beautiful and they were not afraid of the king's edict. If you go back to the story, I think there's also another important line in that story, and that not only did Moses' parents not fear the king's edict and not fear what the king had to say, and were not about to obey or go along with the Pharaoh's demand that the firstborn sons of the Hebrews would be put to death, but also the midwives were also very aware that this was not good. And they were praised. They were commended by God in the story too. The story specifically says, and these midwives, were probably a mix of both Egyptians and Hebrews. And it also reminds us that the Bible's very aware that we have a God-given understanding of right and wrong. And when we see that God-given understanding of right and wrong in its true category of right and wrong, and it's always wrong to kill babies, by way of execution, that God commends that. And so there is something to be seen there, because God does not miss people who maybe don't know him personally, but they do know that right and wrong comes from God, and they side themselves with right, and therefore they side themselves with God. God doesn't miss that. In fact, he commends that as faith in him. When we are on the side of right in God's eyes, we get God's commendation as well, because that's us using what we were created to be and do appropriately. So the rest of the paragraph unfolds about Moses, and it really is about Moses when he grows up. He is picked up by the Pharaoh's daughter and ends up being raised in the Pharaoh's house, and then he leaves the Pharaoh's house, and we're told not only did he leave the Pharaoh's house, but he had to flee from Pharaoh, and he wasn't afraid. That he endured. He endured because he knew that he was serving something far bigger. And the text even says that Moses considered the reproach of Christ. Again, that word reproach, probably a different word than we're used to, but the reproach just simply means the dishonor. He considered the dishonor of Christ a greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. Which is interesting, because the author has just slipped Christ into the story of Moses. And we know that Moses did not understand Jesus Christ. But one thing is for sure, Moses did make it clear to the Hebrews that someone far greater than him was coming. Someone a Messiah, a Christ was coming that was far greater than him. And so, no, he didn't know Jesus the way we know Jesus in the New Testament, but he did understand that the solution that God was bringing into this world involved someone far greater than him. And he considered whoever God was bringing in the world greater than him, who we know as Christ, he considered that it was far greater to serve that Christ, even if the world rejected that Christ, than to serve the treasures of Egypt. And that's a lot. The Egyptians had a lot of treasures. We know that because the whole world seemed to loot them once they found these buried treasures in the pyramids. But Moses is commended as being a Jesus guy, which is kind of fun to think about because the timeless nature of God is here, cited, to say that Moses was a complete Jesus guy. Even though he didn't know Jesus the way we know Jesus, he is a Jesus guy. And Moses himself is a character that if you read the story correctly, you're going to find that Moses was nothing to look at. He was nothing to be impressed by. He was shy. He had a stutter. He really was kind of a bumbler in many ways because he became self-aware of his Hebrew status, must have been the way he looked, and he went out and he saw the Hebrews being mistreated and he disagreed with that, and so he even murdered an Egyptian. And then the story gets even funnier because then Moses turns around after murdering this Egyptian for treating Hebrews bad. And then he runs across a couple Hebrews and he tries to tell them to stop fighting. And they say, who are you? You going to kill us like you did that Egyptian? You see, Moses lives in the real world of real people that aren't necessarily pretty all the time. And the real world where, people don't behave properly. And Moses is one of those. Moses does not behave properly all the time. And there's nothing suave and debonair about Moses. It's not why God picked him for the job. God picked him for the job because he actually was weak, because he didn't bring anything to the table. And that's what makes Moses a really commendable man of faith and actually a pattern for the characters that God brings to the table, that they are not the tall, good-looking guy in the room, that they are not the most educated, that they are not the brightest people all the time. He'll use those too, but his chief characters are oftentimes the people who aren't really worth looking at. And Moses is really one of those kinds of characters. What makes Moses great is just simply that he has faith in God. And you could be a Moses. Moses stutters. He has educational problems. He has learning disabilities just like me. And hey, I like the idea that God chooses people like me rather than all the beautiful people of the world. I don't know about you, but that makes me feel pretty good. And I think we all agree with that. We tend to love the beautiful losers, as Bob Seger would sing, more than anything. We're underdog people. We root for the underdog. And the Bible teaches us that we are supposed to root for the underdog, for real. And so the next part of the passage, verse 29 to 31, recounts three big events. It recounts how the people, through faith, walked through the Red Sea as if they were on dry land. And because they had faith, they made it. But because the Egyptians were trying to kill them and obviously not working on faith, well, they were drowned behind, the Egyptian soldiers were drowned behind the people of Israel as they crossed through the Red Sea. And by faith, the walls of Jericho fell down, which is hilarious to me because Israel was not a warring tribe. They had no skills when it came to war. They had no skills when it came to being military soldiers. In fact, God knows that so much in the story of Jericho. He says, all I need you to do is walk around the walls of Jericho for 7 days. I'll drop the walls for you. And then there's the story of the prostitute Rahab. So what do we have here? We have a story that is seemingly beyond belief. It's phenomenal. The idea of a sea parting and people walking through it, miraculous, whatever the word you want to call it. Obviously, it's spectacular. And so are the walls of Jericho falling down. That too is truly spectacular, miraculous, hard for us to wrap our heads around in our so scientific mind. But hey, let's remind ourselves that not all the answers of life are found on earth the way we think that they are. And indeed, the answers that we're being directed to are answers that come from heaven. And the idea of faith is the idea from heaven that God is pointing us to. And so we have these two spectacular or phenomenal or miraculous, events, the parting of the Red Sea and the walls of Jericho falling down. But we're also told that by faith, Rahab the prostitute, she did not perish with those who were disobedient because she had given a friendly welcome to the spies. And Rahab the prostitute not only features well here, but Rahab the prostitute also ends up featuring in the genealogy of Jesus Christ, as Matthew gives it to us. That's right. Rahab the prostitute is elevated for her faith, commended for her faith, just like the people are commended for their faith walking through that Red Sea, just like the people are commended for their faith when they walked around Jericho for 7 days. So too is a prostitute, which starts to build the biblical picture here. Number one, if you're reading the Bible and you can't handle miracles, if you can't handle God interrupting the normal science of our life, I don't even know what to tell you. If I'm going to have a conversation with God, I kind of expect God to be able to do things that I can't do. It's really funny to me when people are aghast that, God would do things that people can't do in the Bible. Okay, but the more telling part of the story is just this story about Rahab and how she features as a woman of faith, and she's a prostitute. She's a dirty girl. She is, in the world's eyes, not to be commended, but in God's eyes, he's got a solid round of applause for Rahab just because she put her faith and her trust in God. She loved God. She actually told the spies, she said, I love your God. He's awesome. I heard all about him. I'm in. And God commended her as much as he commended those who went through the Red Sea, those who walked around Jericho. He commended her just as much as he commended Moses. You see, Rahab and Moses are commended by God. They're equal in God's eyes. You might say, well, Moses did a lot more. Oh, no, he didn't. And Moses would disagree with you if you think if Moses found you celebrating him more than Rahab, he would set you straight. He would say, we were both waiting for the Christ to come. We both knew that God had promises that he was going to deliver on that were far bigger than this world. So anyhow, the text continues on, and the author says, and what more shall I say? Time would fail me to tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, and Samuel. All of these characters were nobodies. None of these characters outside of Samson. Okay, Samson was that tall, dark, and handsome guy. But Barak and Samson and Jephthah, they did what seems to be more wrong than good. But they did do good. Don't get me wrong. They did respond to God in faith, but even responding to God in faith, the story reveals how much wrong they did. And the story of Jephthah is unbelievable in what he does that is wrong, but yet God can take care of that. That is part of the storyline. God is simply looking for you to trust in him, and God can take all of the blunders of people of faith and he can make them right. God is not only big enough to part the Red Sea, God is big enough to take care of all of the mistakes, all of the sins, and all of the problems that have been committed in this world, both by unbelievers and believers. This is why the Bible commends us for having faith in God, because this is the only place where the wrongs of this world can actually be righted in a serious and meaningful way. So the author goes on this kind of rendition of faith conquering kingdoms, enforcing and justice and obtaining promises, stopping the mouths of lying, quenching the power of fire. So if you know anything about the biblical storyline, these are all, headlines, so to speak, from biblical stories. But the big point is made in the middle of it. But the big point is that God was making strong out of weakness. So all of these characters, Gideon was a weak character. Barak was a weak character who was shown up by Deborah, a woman. Samson was a tall, dark, and handsome guy, but he was weak in so many areas. Jephthah was a weak character. He was weak in his heart in so many ways. David was a weak character in his beginnings, and Samuel was a weak character too. But God is the God who makes strong out of weakness. Yeah, they might have been mighty in war, but some of the characters, in fact, most of the characters, didn't accomplish great things. That's the second half of this passage. The second half of this passage makes it clear that some were tortured. Some refused to accept release so that they might see a better life. They were mocked. They were flogged. They were in chains. They were imprisoned. They were stoned. They were sawn in two. Isaiah the prophet is reported to have been sawn in two. They were killed with the sword. They went about in skins of sheep, goats. They were destitute. They were afflicted. They were mistreated. So it's important to see that faith, biblically speaking, does at times conquer evil. But faith also endures evil. So the real heroes of the Bible, the unsung heroes of the Bible, were the ones who didn't get to see the great successes, but they never wavered in their faith because they knew that this world was not worthy of them and that their faith in God was the only thing that was going to get them to a better life. They saw this world for what it was. It was in trouble. It was in need of judgment by God, and they knew that sometimes faith would conquer evil, but sometimes faith would just have to endure evil, and enduring evil is the character trait of faith. Just as much as conquering evil, enduring evil is the quality of faith. And so there's no rose garden promised in the Bible that you're going to conquer everything. Nope, you might have to endure. And the Bible's really split, as to its heroes. Well, and I would say far more of the Bible's heroes, including Jesus himself, had to endure the crappy world that we live in, had to endure the injustices of this world, had to endure the stonings and the afflictions and the mistreatments of this world. So the Bible is there for those who feel that this world is lacking a lot. And it's there to give us that assurance, that hope, and that conviction that we're on the right side of things, and that God in the Bible makes promises that what we are seeking is completely out of this world, and God will indeed make good on the promises of our redemption, make good on the promises of all the good things that we long for. He makes good on those promises. Yes, we are going to die, but after our death, just like after these people's deaths, we look forward to the promises of God being fulfilled once and for all. The idea here is that we are all in this together, and being in it together means that the small and the big alike, those who accomplish very little, those who accomplish a lot, are measured by God on the same exact platform, the platform of faith. In fact, those are some pretty praiseworthy words, that the world is not worthy of those who have been mistreated by this world. And even those who, like David, who did conquer kingdoms, but he too was mistreated at every twist and every turn. There is no promise that things are going to go well for us here in this world, but there is every promise that God is going to redeem this world and set it straight the way that he intended it to be from the very beginning. And we're told lastly that all of these, they were commended for their faith, but they didn't receive the ultimate promise. They didn't receive it because God had something better in mind for everybody. And that thing that's better in mind for everybody is the coming of Christ. And so they were just put into this as the storyline that would get us to Jesus Christ. And in the story of Jesus Christ, we now know what Moses wished that he would have known in his own life, that Jesus Christ, God himself, would reveal himself as the one fully capable of conquering death and conquering the injustices of this world, the sins of this world. And it is together with the heroes of the old, like Moses, like Rahab the prostitute, that we stand arm in arm with in faith. And we are measured the same in faith. And God praises us for our faith. That is a wonderful picture to imagine God praising us for our faith, our trust, and our love in him. That's a serious relationship that defines who we are and gives us the highest amount of assurance and hope and conviction, because we know that in our faith in God, in our trust in God, in relying and depending and believing in God, that he is giving us a massive round of applause. And just like Rahab the prostitute, just like Barak and Samson and Jephthah, maybe we have a life that looks like a disaster, but we can be comforted, we can be assured, we can have hope, because God is measuring us on our faith, and he assures us he will straighten out all of the wrongs that we have ever committed. And the testimony is in those who came before us. The Bible elevates the same kind of people in God's story as God makes something strong out of weakness. And remember those words of Joseph too that ended the book of Genesis, that God, we might mean it for evil, but God means it for good, meaning that God's goodness can never be trumped by our evil. We might mean it for evil, he might mean it for evil, she might mean it for evil, but God will turn it into his goodness. That is the promise, and that is the storyline of the Bible as well, the whole way through Jesus Christ, who does not change the story and gives us this hope and assurance and conviction, this commendation by God. Well, there's our History of the World Part 2. Thanks for hanging with us. We'll see you next time.